Welcome to the Election University podcast, a weekly show where we hear from industry experts who share tips and tricks for winning campaigns. Whether you're running for office now, thinking about it for the future, or just want to know more about campaigns and elections, Election University is for you. With Election University, click, learn, win. And now your host, Jason Bennett and Rainey Cohen.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back, listeners, to the Election University podcast. I am your co-host, Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
Very excited for today's topic today. We have received some feedback over the last several months from folks who are curious to know, how do we run elections? What goes into conducting elections? How do you determine who's on the voter rolls, who stays, who goes?
How do you keep them secure?
How do you keep it secure? Exactly. And so today I thought it would be really great to invite onto our show someone who's an expert in this. And we're going to talk today with the Registrar of Voters from Orange County, which happens to be the fifth largest voting jurisdiction in the United States. We're going to be talking with Neal Kelley, who is their Registrar of Voters.
Right. And Orange County serves more than 1.6 million registered voters, just to give you some scale on what the fifth largest voting district means.
Right.
And so that sounds, enormous to me. Luckily, Neal's been doing elections in Orange County since 2004, so definitely the expert. And you first encountered Neal when you were at DEF CON.
That's correct.
Over the summer, right? That's
right. So I went to DEF CON this summer to talk about election security, and they had set up a couple of, I don't know what you would call them, breakout, symposiums or speeches or talks. And one of the discussions was they had invited a bunch of elections directors and county clerks and folks who conduct elections in their jurisdictions to come talk about election security. And Neal had been this is his second year participating in it. So he's a return speaker. He cares a lot about this work, cares a lot about the integrity of our elections. So we're going to tap his brain and hear what we can find out about how do you conduct elections.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the interesting things about Orange County this year is that it flipped from red to blue. It's been red for a really long time. And I think nationwide, it was kind of an unexpected election result. And so hopefully he'll be willing to talk to us about that.
Yes.
But, he has to be nonpartisan.
Yeah. We'll see what we can extract from him on that one. And also just, why does it take so long for California to do results, right?
Yeah.
Why was there such great news later, after the election? I think it was like a week and a half after the election, we were still flipping
Felt
seats.
like a month.
Yeah. And California is an all vote by mail state, similar to Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, if I'm remembering the states correctly. And so we're going to learn about that. What's unique about conducting elections like that, and why does it take so long? And we're going to find out all that information from Neal.
Love it.
Yeah, fantastic.
Let's do it.
So without further ado, let's get into the interview. Neal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
In the pre-interview, we read a brief bio and resume for you, but we're wondering if you could expand on that a little bit more. We'd love to hear your origin story and how you got involved in elections.
Yeah, it's actually an unusual story. I was in the private sector in retail, and I did that for about 14, 15 years and grew a company out here in Southern California. And I sold that to a national firm back in just before 2000. And was kind of looking for my next move, and I had run for public office. I had gotten my MBA in between, and of course, I made payroll for 14 plus years. And started teaching college for a little bit. And Orange County launched a new voting system in 2003. Had a lot of issues with the launch, and they were looking for somebody from the outside of the county to come in and assist, in getting the department together. And what was unusual about that is in county government, most individuals in senior positions kind of rise up through these ranks. Well, I came in sideways, completely, out of the blue, with no elections experience, but what I had was strong management, organizational behavior, logistics, et cetera, which it turns out you need all of those in elections. And so, as you go down the path since then, I have managed over 75 major elections in Orange County. I have overseen the production and tally of about 15 million ballots. And I've been doing this now for about 14 years as well. So, it's kind of an unusual background, but I love what I do and glad to be a part of it.
Well, elections got a bit of press this year,
To say the least.
There was some interest in what was going on electorally this year, and we're hoping for folks that don't really understand how elections are conducted, if you could walk us through a bit of what's the day in the life like for a registrar like yourself.
So thank you for that. It's an unusual life. I'll tell you that managing 1.6 million voter records in the fifth largest jurisdiction in the country has a lot of challenges, but I think sort of the daily activity is just managing all the logistics and the resources that it takes to not only bring elections to the voters in Orange County, but to build the relationships with all the cities, because all the cities consolidate with us, with all the special districts, with all the elected officials. I just came off of the November election with over 400 candidates that were on the ballot. And so that sort of daily life involves huge numbers of action items and planning meetings and managing those resources on a daily basis. And a lot of people will ask me, what do you do in between elections? Well, the reality is, in a large county, you're always managing for the next election because there's always vacancies and people, run for seats and move up and et cetera. So, in fact, I've got an election that we're going to be managing here in just 2 months from now. So it's a daily involvement of just huge logistics. I think that's the best way to put it.
So would you say that the number one challenge that you face being a large voting district is the number of elections that you have to manage? Like, is that the biggest difference between you and a smaller voting jurisdiction?
Yes, that's definitely for sure, because of just sort of that trickle-down effect of everybody moving around from different elected positions and opening up vacancies. And in a large jurisdiction like myself or LA County, San Diego, that just happens all of the time. Then it's also, one of the big challenges is just managing the sheer volume, because although it's scalable, it's huge logistics and managing the volume of ballots. And we print our own ballots as well, so I have a whole printing production facility. So there's a lot that goes into it.
Wow.
One of the questions that I have, particularly as you're thinking about just the size of the jurisdiction that you're dealing with, is how do you predict turnout and how the resources that you're going to need for something like this year in particular that exceeded in many jurisdictions and even in some of them 2016 turnout, presidential year turnout. How do you scale for that? How do you predict and plan for something that is somewhat hard to predict?
So I want to say it's a little bit of science, but there's, I think, a little bit of magic that goes into that. And going back, 9, 10, 11 months ago, I knew this was going to be a huge year. I mean, we knew that we had these tight congressional districts. We knew that they were going to be targeted. And in fact, true to the word of parties, they definitely targeted these districts. And so from that standpoint, I look back historically at the midterms and what the turnout was, and I bumped it by about 20%. Well, it turns out that 20% wasn't even enough, because we ended up with a 71% turnout, which almost mirrors, presidential turnout in Orange County. In fact, the last presidential, we had 74%.
Wow.
So we came pretty close to managing it and to be able to predict those resources that were needed. But at the end of the day, it still exceeded that. So it's always tough to try and get it just right.
Well, what do you do when you undershoot it like that? Are you like scrambling or what does that even mean?
Well, so the good news is that, we're mid-year in the budget cycle, so I have padding in terms of money and resources. But what I ended up having to do was keep all of our extra help on longer than I normally would have. So that is one of the things that I immediately did. And the other is I go back to my elected board and say, okay, now we're in this position where I'm going to need more money before the end of the fiscal year. So it's those two things combined that you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I imagine immediately after the election is certified, you start the planning process for not even just the elections that are going to get you through 2019, but your presidential year coming up, and thinking about resources that you have to allocate for that. Is that true? Did you start this process already?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm already planning several elections in 19, like I was telling you. But just, looking ahead to the presidential in California now, the primary has moved almost 6 months back to March.
Right.
So we're in a presidential primary in basically a year from now.
Wow.
So we're already starting that planning process, and the other thing that I'm doing is trying to move to vote centers here in Orange County, and that's something that I'll continue to work on, and bring on a new voting system, and do all of that, by the start of the March primary.
So what is the new voting system? Are you getting new machines, new optical scanners or something?
Yeah, so we are definitely at the end of the life cycle for our current system, and I'm going out to an RFP here in a couple of weeks, and we'll see where the market's at. So I'm open to options and what's out there. I think from a visionary standpoint, I think we're headed towards some sort of a hybrid paper-based system, but we'll see where we're at.
Okay, so there's so many questions that come to mind as a result of this. Because I think we live here in Washington State. We are an all-mail-by system. I think we were the first one in the country. California has instituted this recently, but you still have in-person voting on Election Day, correct?
Correct.
And so that's why you're looking for a new system that has a hybrid of optical scanners and the paper ballots. So for folks who may be in Washington State or in another vote-by-mail state that may be a little atypical, walk us through. You have to have basically counters for Election Day and then counters for the huge onslaught that you get on Election Day and then the counting that happens afterwards. Is that accurate?
That's right. And then if we do move to vote centers, it's a 10-day in-person voting window as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that on top.
Wow.
Wow. All the options, which is great for voters, but sounds like super complicated for you.
Yeah. Plate spinning.
That's right.
So reflecting on this year, what do you think worked really well and what are you looking to improve for 2020?
You know what I think worked really well was the production of our ballots, the mailing operation. We do all of that in-house, and we're one of the only California counties that does everything end-to-end, from the raw paper stock from the mill to a completed packet in your mailbox. And so I think that whole operation worked really well given the size of it and given the fact that I just brought on new equipment for 2018. And kudos to the team because I think a really good job. I think the thing that we could always do better is sort of that voter experience. What's that in-person experience like? And it's such a challenge when I'm dealing with 10,000 volunteers and 1,200 polling places because we do all these things that we control ourselves, and then we sort of release it to 10,000 volunteers and we say, good luck.
Right.
I mean, we're there to support you, but, that's a model that, in my opinion, is archaic, and we need to move away from that. So I'm always looking for ways to improve the voter experience, and I'm hoping to do that certainly in 2020.
Do you have thoughts about West Virginia is doing the pilot project for internet voting for certain types of voters? Are you in favor of that? Are you opposed to that? Is that something that would be part of your suggestion box for the voter experience?
I hope that we don't differ on this, but I can tell you that I just don't think we're in a good spot to be able to do internet voting. I don't, all of the work that I've done with Homeland Security on the task force over the last 18 months, 2 years, and the work that I've done with academics, et cetera, I don't think we're there. And I think it's kind of foolhardy to go down that path, personal opinion. But certainly, having online marking devices for voters with disabilities is something we're moving in that direction. But, I don't think we're at a good spot to be able to return those ballots in that same fashion. So that still concerns me.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say I agree. Like, as much as I want to be able to just vote online, there is no part of me that believes that security is in a place where that would be possible.
Right.
I think so.
Yeah, I'm 2,000% in agreement with you on that one. Yeah. And the thing that I find maddening about the conversation is people are, well, banks, have figured out a way that you can enter in a PIN and get secure access. It's like they spend millions of dollars on their security, and we can't even get certain jurisdictions to apply patches to their voting machines to update their software. It's like, there's no way that I would ever be in support of that, especially in the trajectory that we're on right now. But speaking of which, that's a great transition. You and I met at the DEF CON conference, and I know that cybersecurity is something that you care about quite a bit. And I'm wondering what you saw this year in the midterms, if there's anything that you can talk about, obviously, publicly, about the threats that you saw or concerns that you have going into another large presidential year.
Yeah, being a part of that Homeland Security Task Force, I was able to get my security clearance and was briefed throughout the year, which was great. Had ongoing discussions almost weekly at times with Homeland Security and the FBI, and we did so much leading up to this cycle, but it wasn't, in my opinion, enough because there are still threats out there. There's still vulnerabilities, but we're at least on the right path. And I think to make sure that we're resilient is something that's really important. From actual threats, I mean, the daily scanning continues to take place. We saw that from several countries, including China and Russia and even Iran. And so just making sure that we have a very robust security system in place to be able to push back against those scans and to make sure that we don't have any vulnerabilities that could be compromised on the network side is something we did daily. Although I wanted to do this before the November election, we didn't quite meet our goal, but we just switched over to the AWS, Amazon Web Services, and so we have a whole new platform with even more robust security. So it's just a daily thing, and I think that election officials need to be on guard and realize that the threats are not going to go away. They're only going to increase. They're only going to get worse, and we need to be prepared for that.
I don't think I know what you mean by scans from China or other countries. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Yes, I'm sorry. So automated bots that are being sent out looking for holes in networks. And these automated bots are coming out as fast and furious. I think for people that are listening, it's important to point out that, we also see that in the retail sector and in healthcare, et cetera. So it's not just elections, but there are always bad actors that are looking for a hole to be able to compromise.
Okay.
And so that's what I mean by the scamming.
Okay. So I guess that's what I was looking for. Like, it's not specific to elections so much as it's just
correct.
One of the threats that, need to be combated.
Monitored.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
One of the things that I thought was interesting at DEF CON, and it was my first full year of participating in there, and it's something that I care about greatly, is the integrity and protection of our elections, is that there are 4 areas that an elections director like yourself has to be constantly monitoring, right? It's the voter registration database, where there can be manipulation there. It's the influence of the actual election itself, so distortion of information, telling people the wrong election date or the wrong location or whatever. The results themselves in the machines, protecting the results as they come in on election day through the machines. And then the posting of results, which is something that I had never even thought about before as a vulnerability, is, the websites where you post this data is also a place to think about, exposure and vulnerability. What kind of budgets do you have to devote to this to protect all 4 of those gates and trying to keep them safe?
Yeah, so my annual budget, depending on the year and how many elections, averages between $13 and $15 million. And we allocate about 10% of that to the specific security items related to the 4 components you talked about. But I want to elaborate just a little bit and say that, so I'm looking at sort of 3 different components of the overall operation, and that's physical. So we still have the physical security piece we have to worry about. Then I've got the cyber side, which is the whole network components. I'm very fortunate to be in Orange County because in addition to all the work that we do, we've got a very strong central IT system that does fantastic work for us. And then the third is, and by the one that probably keeps me awake the most at night, is the social side. In other words, social engineering and people that might be going after my employees or passwords and all the things that, you have the human vulnerability piece that's pretty scary as well.
Yeah.
So while I tell you that about 10% of that is budgeted, kind of those 4 areas, it's a little more complex than that just because I have all these other people that I've got to worry about too.
Right. It's like so daunting. It's hard to
Well, I think considering that a bunch of our audience are people who want to run for office or are currently running, there are people who are mostly in down ballot campaigns. And so do you have any advice that you would give to campaign or other political people about how to safeguard their own campaigns or local elections?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that's tough because you're certainly relying on, especially if you're running a smaller campaign, sometimes on service providers or people that are assisting you that you don't necessarily have the same level of control that you might, like I do, for instance. So it's just asking the right questions and making sure that, your campaign website and any databases that might be exposed online, that you have a good discussion with people that are working with you on security and what sort of security levels are involved. I mean, we know that the systems were compromised in California on some of the campaigns. That's made national news. So it does happen. And I think just in general, if you're using voter data and using that as a part of your campaign, it's so important to protect that and make sure that you have some good security systems in place. And I think I'm answering the question the right way.
Yeah.
In other words, that's what you were looking for, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, okay. In other words, so campaign data and what they're using and how they're using it online, that's always something to be cognizant of.
Taking it another step further, because I'm assuming out of I can't even remember how many jurisdictions there are. Do you remember, is there 10,000 voting jurisdictions?
It's a little over 9,000.
9,000 voting jurisdictions in the United States, and not everyone takes this as seriously as, say, you do. Or, maybe rephrased another way, they just don't have the resources either to devote to the systems that you do as well. And I'm wondering if there are folks listening, we have listeners in all 50 states who are listening to the show. What can they do to help not monitor necessarily as it's like their job to monitor it, but, I just keep thinking about in Broward County this year, how somebody had noticed the undervote, overvote was so large in Broward County that it kind of forced extra analysis. And what can people be doing to kind of track and double check and help and assist and prop up maybe some jurisdictions that aren't as well resourced?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question because I have some strong thoughts about that. I'm a very strong advocate of transparency in elections, and to the extent that there are resources and people are interested in volunteering, getting out there and monitoring the election itself from kind of start to finish. Most of the observers that come in after Election Day, which is unfortunate because we're processing ballots 10 days before Election Day. And nobody ever comes in and looks at that. But I would encourage people to do that because you're made aware of how the system works and you're able to monitor what's going on. I think more importantly, though, is after data starts coming out, if there are organizations or people that can take that data and scrub it and look for anomalies, and I've had some kids that are 18 years old that have done that and have done great work doing that. All of that is helpful. What's not helpful, though, is for people to do that and then throw stuff up on the internet based on their assumptions without having all of the data and without having all of the insight. So I think it's a combination. One, it's monitoring it, doing some analysis, but also asking the questions, getting in there with your election official and, finding out what it means. I have a great example for you. We had one precinct. By the way, I had 1,700 voting precincts where there was 120% turnout.
Wow.
So people took that and threw it up on the internet and said, oh, there's this problem, et cetera. Well, it turns out it was one of our poll workers who was hitting the wrong button when they were checking people in. So they were putting people in the wrong precinct reporting bucket. And so there's simple explanations sometimes, but that stuff just spreads like wildfire if you're not, asking the right questions.
Right. So talking about the elections this year, what's your impression of what's happening in Orange County? We're seeing, I think for the lay person watching this, we saw a blue wave happening in Orange County. Insofar as you feel comfortable chatting about this, it's not red anymore, right? I think people thought of this as sort of the birthplace of the modern Republican Party, and now it's turned blue. Did you see this coming? Have you felt this? You have such experience with this over so many years. Have you seen this pattern developing over time?
Well, certainly there were indicators of registration changes over the last several years. The distance between the Republicans and the Dems just in the last few months got down to about a point. And before, you were talking 5, 6, 7 points just, several years ago. So that definitely was an indicator. I knew 9 months ago that the Democratic National Committee was going to have a war room in Irvine, California, out here in Orange County. That never happened. They had never done that before. We also knew that there was going to be about $120 million pumped in to these 4 congressional districts. So all of those 3 things were strong indicators that something was going to happen.
Right.
I didn't know that it was going to completely change over to blue, and I think that there's been some really good reflective comments by the local Republican Party out here about, realizing what occurred and what they need to do differently. So I think that while I wasn't surprised, I was surprised. And I know that's probably not the best answer.
I think it's a great answer.
The fact that all of those turned over the way they did.
Yeah, it was stunning to watch, which also leads me to my next question, which is the counting, right? I think California got beat up a little bit for the time it takes to count your ballots. We here in Washington State are fairly immune to it because we know that our elections can sometimes be decided.
Week and a half to have a result.
Yeah, but very infrequently you're watching so many seats flip later in the process. Is there a movement? Is there a push? Is there pressure on you or maybe a legislative fix to speed that process up or do a course correction on it?
You know what they have done, and I say they, being the legislature over the last 2 or 3 years, they have instituted tremendous voting reforms. And those voting reforms have extended the period with which voters can react to things. So, for instance, if your signature doesn't match or you forgot to sign your ballot, or same-day registration, right? All of those things now push the certification out just by the very nature of the time.
Right.
So, for instance, if you have a mismatched signature, you now have basically 20 days to cure that post-election. So even if we had all the ballots counted, it still wouldn't be certified until all those deadlines were cleared. That's number one. Number 2, we have a provisional epidemic out here in California. The number of provisional ballots that were cast were historic. People that are going to the wrong polling place because they want convenience or they're not bringing their vote by mail ballot with them. Provisional ballot counting takes 3 times as long as vote by mail ballot counting. And then you add on top of that, to me, is the biggest kicker of all was this was the first election where I had more ballots on election night than I did the full 30 days before election day.
Wow.
Which means that people were dropping them off in droves. They were not mailing them. They were casting provisional ballots. They were going to their polling place. And so those dynamics have changed to just basically make it purely a volume game. I'm running maximum efficiency, and you just can't keep up with the volume, even if I doubled my staff.
Yeah. I'll say we saw a little bit of... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think you guys are raising a good point. Yes, there was definitely some press in that regard, but I think this other perspective of where the voting reforms have gone need to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think we saw a little bit of that here in Washington State, too, because you can mail in your ballot or you can drop it off at a certified ballot drop box. And people were dropping them off in counties that they didn't live in, like on their way to work or where, for whatever reason. And so counties were receiving hundreds of ballots that hadn't been dropped off inside their county, but, they were like late arrivals. And so it was like, wait, stop everything. We might do a recount. Like it held up a couple of elections here.
I had 5,000 dropped off from LA County, San Diego, and Riverside.
Wow.
And then what do you have to do? You have to get them to them in a timely fashion, I imagine. But how do you verify? I mean, what's the process for this?
Well, so we go off either the postmark or the date signed by the voter, and then we sort them all by county, and then we ship them to those counties. We physically, drive them there.
Wow.
And that's just one tiny little sliver of what we had to deal with. I had 400, almost 500,000 ballots post-election.
Wow.
Which is just unheard of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Dang. Dang.
I mean, it's just like I'm getting 17 more questions in my
know.
brain, but I want to be really respectful of your time because I know you have to jump back into your meeting. So
also,
thank you.
one thing I want to say real quick is, Neal, I love how much you love your job. Like, I can hear it in your answers, how much you really enjoy doing this work. And so thank God for you, because we need people like you doing this work.
Like literally 9,000 more of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment because it does get in your blood. And if you're not passionate about it, it's going to show. So thank you for recognizing.
Yeah.
We like to ask our guests to brag about their staff or their constituents. What are you the most proud of, as the registrar of the 5th largest voting jurisdiction in the United States? What this is your opportunity to do some bragging rights for those folks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Honestly, guys, my staff, I love them to death. And when you see these folks literally working 18-hour days and sleeping sometimes there and not getting a chance to go see their families and doing this straight for essentially 6 months, this is the part the public doesn't see. And so to be able to brag about them and the hard work they do day in and day out is just an honor to work with them. So I came from the private sector. I was a critic of government, and I didn't grow up in the county system, and now I see this side of how hard these folks are working to bring elections to the voters. So anyway, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to say that, because I am very proud.
Thank you.
Awesome. I love it.
You should let them have an ugly Christmas sweater day at the office then, or take them to the park. I don't know. What do you do? What do you do as a staff appreciation? I have no idea.
You give them the week off.
You give them the
what
week
you
off.
do without charging them PTO.
Yeah.
That's right.
Where can folks learn more about the great work that you're doing?
Yes, thank you. So ocvote.com, we have a very robust website, and I'm proud of a lot of the things that are on there. I would encourage people, if they're interested in, we have a ton of reports and good data that we put out there. 2 things I'd want to point to on our website. One is our Data Central section, which is real-time data. It looks almost like you're looking at a stockbroker's page because of the way it's configured, but the bottom line is you can get lots of good, rich information. And the other is our election library. We have over 50 reports and documents that are in there that talk about the work we do, projects and pilots that we've done. We just did a risk limiting audit pilot. And so all of that information is there as well. So I would encourage people to visit that.
Fantastic. We'll include all of those in the show notes as well. Neal, thank you so much for your time today. We could talk to you for hours, but I know you have to get back to work. So I'm so sorry that we've kept you over. Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, and happy holidays, guys. Thanks again.
You too.
Thanks, Neal.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Another big thank you to Neal Kelley, Registrar of the Orange County. Oh, God, I just totally screwed that up.
For
Orange
Registrar
County.
of Voters for Orange County.
Period.
California.
Yeah, it's like you talk about so many of these elections departments and they all have different names. So thank you, Neal. We really appreciate you taking the time. That was a fascinating discussion.
So nerdy and awesome.
Yes.
And again, I love talking to people who love their jobs.
Yeah.
Even if I, previously didn't. You can get me interested in what you're doing if you love your job and you talk to me about it.
Yeah. It's just good to know that good people are in these positions. You hear all of the horror stories, particularly this year, if you're looking at Florida in particular, Georgia, just there are jurisdictions out there where you just wonder, why are they doing this job? They just aren't doing it well, and they're hurting the voters. And then you hear a story like this, and I'd rather put spotlight on something like that, that it's being executed well, it's in good hands. Somebody's thinking about the voter experience, but also is running a really well executed program. And it's just fantastic to hear. So
Need
Neal,
more Neals.
Yeah, more Neals, 9,000 more Neals, please. Listeners, what did you think? We are very interested in knowing what you thought about today's episode. And if you have any suggestions about topics that we should be covering, let us know. This is, this podcast episode in particular was an origination from feedback we received from listeners. So we listen and we execute. So please let us know at podcast@electionu.com.
And follow us on Facebook. We're on Instagram sometimes when we remember to take photos of ourselves here in the studio. Engage with us on social media. We really love hanging out with you. So
thank you so much to our listeners. And we are really excited that season 2 is well underway now. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share them at any time. So thank you so much. I'm Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This week's episode has ended, but the campaign fun doesn't have to. Head on over to www.electionu.com, where you can access all of the links mentioned in today's episode, as well as the show notes. There you can also sign up for regular announcements or register for our campaign school. It's your very own online personal trainer for winning campaigns. www.electionu.com. Click, learn, win.